And we're live. Hey, Ed, welcome back.
Hello, good morning, good
So,
afternoon, good
what's
evening, good
happened
night.
this week?
um, a lot of review. So we talked about moving on to chapter 4, writing chapter 4, but we are also at the same time, and I'm talking about previous video. Uh, and during the last 1 week, we were also reviewing chapter 2. So I got your views on chapter 2, and I'm now applying your suggestions and ideas. And there's one feeling I felt is that when I started to when I sat down and started to write it, I thought like I'll just go one long run, write the chapter, and it will be done. Maybe one more edit, maybe two edits, and it will be done. But no, because the chapter usually chapters are full of ideas, and the ideas develop as you write along, and then when you reread them, you see things that you were not seeing before, and then you want to add that. So that has grown from a seedling into a full-fledged tree. Now we are happy with the direction and the contents of the chapter, but the process of editing has taken so long, or writing, then reviewing, then editing, and then reviewing, making changes, that it sometimes feels frustrating. And this week was one of those weeks that like, oh,
By
we are
the way,
still not
that's
done.
one of the objections that Jennifer has about the writing process, which is the frustrating aspect of editing. So, a couple of ideas on that. So, obviously, it's really useful to have a co-writer, right? So, if you have a co-writer, that goes much faster because you're in the same cycle, you're helping each other. Um, if you don't have a co-writer, this is why we in the 48-hour workshop we talk about writing 2 to 3 chapters up front, not spending a lot of time editing them, just having it done in the 48-hour workshop so that you can start publishing those and get feedback from your readers. Because if you don't have a co-writer, then obviously you need to have feedback from the readers. So that's an
Yeah.
important aspect. The aspect of frustration, I think, comes from the fact that uh, we want to be done with something, but it takes time to get there. Is that how you feel, Ed?
Yes, exactly. And this is one of those reasons why people drop, and I have dropped balls before, that like, oh, maybe I'll come and revisit it later. No, 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 no. It's important that you close this chapter, however long it takes, before moving on to further things that will come to this stage of frustration altogether at the time, and then you'll have like a couple of tasks or many chapters unfinished.
And
So
that's
it's
why we
better.
also do this weekly call, is to keep us honest, right? To keep us accountable for what we're
Definitely.
doing. So that's another tool we can use, right? To
Yes.
have a regular call with a friend or another author who's writing another book and just
Or maybe
pair
group
up.
coaching calls for us, business idea, who knows,
Yeah, there you
anything.
go. That's why in Oikos Office series we have a writing coach, right? And the writing coach works with the author to keep, of course, the accountability aspect, but also to handle the objections, the problems that they face
Yeah,
during
this
the
is similar
writing.
to TED Talk. You cannot just go and talk in TED unless you hire somebody to train you how to speak at TED, a TED Talk coach. It's like that.
Exactly. So that's perhaps one of the things to let our listeners and viewers understand is that it's okay to feel frustrated, and there's some tools that you can use to help you overcome that frustration, right? Either
Yeah.
you co-author the book, or you have a accountability partner, or you work with a coach, because at the end we do the book because we want to help people and because we know it has a positive impact in our career. So uh, we need to find the tools that help us overcome those frustrations and difficulties.
Yeah, I agree.
But we also wanted to talk about chapter 7 today, Ed. And chapter 7, if I look at the story map, it's the chapter where we say, decide what to write about, understand your audience, create the empathy map, create the elevator pitch, define the goals, define the detailed book content, define the title and the subtitle. And actually, that brings us back to what I would call is the overall writing method. So I thought we could go through that and kind of, I think, tease the workbook that might or might not be coming in the future. And the reason for that is that one of the main objections that Jennifer has is that she hasn't read the book, she hasn't written a book yet, so it's maybe her first book. That's actually one of the characteristics of our avatar. So she needs support. She needs a method, right? So chapter 7 is all about the method, what we
Yeah.
do, how we do it, what are the component parts, what's the process, and so on. So I thought we could go through that. What do you think?
Yeah, I think this is amazing. I just would like to add something. One, it goes hand in hand with the chapter 4 that we talked about last week and in the previous video that you may have access to. Um, and that was talking about the deciding on the topic of your book. Now, this one goes deeper into that. So they go very, very much hand in hand. Another thing that I want to talk about very briefly is if this is the first video you're watching, just know that we are creating or writing our book live during these videos, and you can actually track back our journey, how we are developing ideas and things together. The broader idea is this. So we have this book that is divided into three main chapters, three main parts. Part one is part one help you realize that you're an expert. Part two help you realize that, or we call it, you're an expert, you just don't know it yet. Part two is you're an author, you don't know it yet. So we cover those two areas in these part two, one and two. And part three is you're an expert author, the world doesn't know it yet. And the way we are dividing these is that we are taking off your internal game, the mind game in the first part, which is expertise, the skill game in the second part, which is authoring the book, and the reputation building and marketing game in, or getting the book out in the right hands in part three. All three are based on our experiences of working together, and for the past like 4 years of uh, permutation and combination of different again experiments we did with our
And
customer.
publishing 8 books already.
Yes.
All right, so let's dive into chapter 7. This is a workbook teaser, and teaser because we don't actually know if it's coming, but it might be coming. We'll talk about that as we go. You'll hear about it here in any case if it does come. Then we're going to talk about the language and the method for writing a book. And this is important because when we develop a product, like a book is a product, right? When we develop a product, we have to have a process, right? That's what we would call the method. But the method builds on a certain number of building blocks, and that's the language. What are the items, the Lego bricks that we put together in order for the book to come to fruition? So that's what we are going to talk about that. And of course, this is also notes for chapter 7. So chapter 7 will go in depth into this 48-hour book method and explain many of these. So first we start with the process. So you've heard us talk about this one at length already. Define your focus. In here we talk about what is the avatar and what are the topics. So it's important to understand that avatar and topics are tools that we use to define the focus, right? So that's step one. That's where we start. Then we try to discover the customer struggles. And we talked about SMIQ already. There's probably going to be some, either video course module or workbook for the SMIQ by Ed, because he's the SMIQ expert. Then we have the 48-hour workshop, which we already talked about at length before, and is also the core of chapter 3. So chapter 3 explains the process of the 48-hour workshop. And there we do SMIQ analysis, empathy map definition, and we write the first chapters. And by the way, these are all tools we use to achieve our goal, right? So it's important to understand that all of this method uses a certain number of tools, and we'll talk more about that. Then we find and remove objections as the main cycle of writing the book. We'll talk about that in a second. We test our content with our audience. That's chapter 8, by the way. And then we do what Ed was just saying can be sometimes frustrating, which is write, test, iterate, and improve, right? But here's the thing. This method is not linear. It's cyclical. And you will see that as you write the first chapters, you get better insights into the focus. So you're actually going to be doing this cycle over and over again during the whole process. So that's one of the aspects of this process, is that it is cyclical, not linear. And this will help you, for example, with the testing, right? If this were a linear process, which we do not advise authors follow, you would have to do all the testing up front. Well, that's too early because you don't have all the questions up front, right? It is only as you expose content to your audience that you get more ideas for questions. So I think that's a very important topic to highlight here. Ed, what do you think?
Yeah, definitely. And if you don't have an audience, we do talk about that as well. Uh, to build an audience in the process of getting this feedback.
Yeah, and that's for example, one of the reasons why we say that in the 48-hour workshop we write the first chapters, because as you publish that, in your LinkedIn or in your Twitter or Facebook, and you start getting people interested, that's how you start developing an audience.
Yeah, yeah.
So this is the method overall, and chapter 7 will go and describe each of these in a lot more detail. We'll talk about what empathy map is, and we'll highlight the important aspects of the SMIQ and so on. But then we need to talk about language. So language is what allows you to implement that process we just went through, right? So we define what the avatar is. So when we talk about avatar in this book, it means the persons or the people who we write the book for, right? They are called the perfect reader. Later on, we'll talk about super fans and promoters and all of that, but that's your avatar, right? That's the image of the perfect reader for you. Then we talk about focus, and we use this word specifically here because we want you to concentrate, to focus on the right topic for your book, right? And the focus is why and what we write about, right? So in our case, we defined our avatar as Jennifer. We did the empathy map. We described what are some of the pains, what she hears, what she feels when she thinks about writing a book. And we defined our focus as helping budding authors write their first book. Now, of course, we could argue, yeah, this method is very useful even for people who've written books before. Yeah, it is. It will definitely help you even if you have written books before, especially if you have written books before, because now you know the struggles and we're giving you tools to avoid those. But that's not who our avatar is. Our avatar is someone who wants to grow their career or wants to get better consulting gigs or a higher salary, whatever that is, but wants to get invited to conferences, to speak at conferences as a way to get that improvement in their career. And writing a book is the solution for that, right? It's the tool that helps you cut through the noise, right? The hundreds of submissions the conferences get, I can tell you that most of them have never written a book. Perhaps 1% has written a book, and that already makes you stand out, right? So that's why our focus is there. And we call it focus because we want Jennifer to be focused on the focus, right? It's the overarching motivator for writing the book. Any thoughts on that, Ed?
Nope, nope. We are going to present a lot of case studies on how this is done. And in fact, we are always doing this as well. I'm an example. So I'm actually in the process of using exact same method and creating a book in an industry that I don't have any personal brand or any following or anything at all. People don't know me in that industry. And we are working towards following this plan with that book idea. So probably with time we'll be able to share those findings as well, how it goes, how it's the process looks like.
Yeah, and that's what you get by reading the book we're writing, is our experience.
Yeah.
All right, and then we have topics. So what is a topic? A topic is a main idea that we want to tackle in the book, And topics are later translated into chapters, right? So if you think about focus as the overarching definition of what you're writing about, topics are kind of the bullet points under that focus. And eventually they will become chapters. And we'll talk about that as we discuss the empathy map and how we turn that to how we use that tool to allow us to define the topics and to help us define what are the chapters. In other words, by the end of the 48-hour workshop, you've got the book outline, right? And the book outline has parts, we'll talk about that in a second, and it has chapters, and each topic becomes a chapter.
Right.
And then inside each topic, in other words, inside each chapter, we will tackle objections, struggles, and pain points that our customers have. And these three things are very important, right? Each objection or struggle or pain point is a reason why your avatar does not take action. This is the key point, because we write to help people take action on what they already want to achieve. And of course, as we all know, it is the action that makes the difference, right? So all of the content is structured around helping Jennifer overcome objections, to overcome struggles, and of course, to deal with the pain points. Because nothing that requires effort is easy. That's not, it's never going to be easy. There are more difficult and easier ways to handle those, but nothing is easy, right? So you need to help your avatar, just like we are trying to help Jennifer to take action. And we do that by writing to help them overcome these obstacles to action. So objections, struggles, and pain points will then become the bullet points under topics that you write about. And for example, objections are sections inside a chapter, as an example, right? So we describe the objection. That's very important because we need the avatar to understand that we see the objection, and then we tackle the objection within that chapter.
Yeah. For example, I'm not an expert, or why would anyone listen to me? Why would anyone care about what I have to say? That's an objection. I would rather not write a book at all. Nobody's going to listen to me. So we tackle that, become a big section, big area, like a lot of um, convincing goes into making sure that that objection doesn't stays once you pass through, like from section 1 to section 2. And hence section 1 in our book is you're an expert, you don't know it yet, and the section 2 is you're an author. Now we move to the author side, like I don't know how to write the book, why should I write it, even like it will be overwhelming. So
Yeah, that's
that's
actually
taking
a
it.
very good point. We'll talk about that right now.
Yeah.
That's the part, right? What Ed just described is a part. Uh, you're an expert, you just don't know it yet. That is designed to tackle the objection, exactly like Ed said, right? Nobody will listen to me, right? I don't know anything that others don't already know, also, right?
Yeah.
So, what we say is that the book is split into 3 to 5 parts, three being the best here, not five being the best, but three being the best. And each part tackles one of the key objections that your avatar experiences. This is an important aspect, right? In here, we reverse a little bit the objection versus topic hierarchy, because the key objections are the reasons why your avatar isn't doing anything in the direction of what they wish they were able to do, right? In our case, Jennifer isn't writing a book because she thinks that no one will listen to her and that she is not an expert in anything. And of course, part 1 is about sharing examples of people who wrote a book and became experts in their field because they shared what they already knew. And this is the key, what they already knew, right? And in chapter 3, we even start the chapter by saying that, you know, Jennifer doesn't have time to write the book because she's already so busy working. The reason why she's busy working is because she is an expert. Other people value her expertise, right? And how do we turn that into an amplifier, something that helps her write the book?
Yeah.
Then we have audience. This is, of course, the expertise of Ed, and audience is someone who will benefit from reading your book. You have their email address and you have their permission to contact them. This is important because just random people whom you can't reach are not your audience. What do you say about that, Ed?
Yeah. So in the previous video, I talked about this point a little bit, and I think it's difficult to convey. At least I feel that, but to me, it's very clear that in this particular case, that you're authoring a book to get invited to speak at conferences, you have two types of target. I don't say customers, but target who will benefit from the fact that you have a book. One is the conference organizers. uh, you don't write on a topic on how to organize a conference to sell the book to them. You you actually, what you do is, and that's what we discussed in the previous video, that you identify the conferences that you want to go and then see which audience goes to that conference, and then you write to that audience and you build a tribe around those people so that you become tempting for those conference organizers to invite and speak as as a person of influence on the conference. So we are dealing with two types of audiences, but your book topics are purely about the people who will go to your audience, go to listen to you in your conferences and read your book. By the way, they'll pay money to buy your book. So you're solving problem of the second tier. Let's call it first tier and second tier of audiences, and you build tribe on that audience as well. You don't build a tribe of course you can, but you don't build a tribe of conference organizers. You can build a network with them.
Well, so there's one thing that you bring to conference organizers if you're good at developing an audience, which is you bring people to their conference. And actually, that's one of the things that Jennifer will learn once she writes the book and gets invited to conferences, is that the moment she starts developing an audience, she becomes super interesting for conference organizers. Because think about conference organizers' main problem is to get the conference sold out, right? Don't forget that conference organizers, if they don't get to a certain number of paying participants, they lose money, right? So they want you to come to their conference because you have done the work of developing the audience by sharing your expertise in a book platform, right? So audience is actually what we would call an asset for Jennifer. It becomes an asset for Jennifer.
Yeah. And not to confuse that, you're not expected to have this audience when you begin your journey as a speaker. So for example, I'm at that stage. Vasco, on the other hand, is on the stage where organizers invite him because of his audience, that the audience will go wherever Vasco will go.
The audience was developed by writing the book.
Exactly. So it's again a cyclical, as Vasco is describing. So it's a matter of time, iteration, and fire, aim, repeat, fire, aim, repeat.
Yeah, exactly. The lean startup method, practically.
Right.
All right. And then we have test. And again, coming back to the lean startup method, this is one of the most important recurring activities of the author, Jennifer, right? So a test is an action you take to validate if your content resonates and helps your avatar. And there are very simple ways to test. Like, for example, you do a small Twitter thread, 4 or 5 tweets to tackle a specific problem. You see how people react to it, right? Through that, you get feedback, what type of questions you get, right? What type of counter arguments or objections you get. All of that is information that you can then use to improve the book. In other words, that's a very, very cheap way to get content tested. But there are also other more expensive and longer term and time consuming ways. When we talk about testing, we talk about the activity of validating. But the tools that we use for testing can be many. Can be sending an email to an email list, can be publishing a blog post, can be getting a blog post published by another blog. That's also, by the way, a good way to develop audience at the same time that you're testing your message. And of course, the SMIQ itself is already a test, right? when you put out an SMIQ with a specific topic in mind, like we did, when it comes to writing a book, what is the single biggest problem that you experience? Then we learned that actually people didn't really want to write the book. They just wanted to write the book because they wanted to be invited to speak at conferences and grow their career. That's how we developed our topic, was through that test. And when it comes to testing, Ed is the expert here. He's running God knows how many different tests all the time. So what you got to say about that, Ed?
Well, I think my culture of testing started while working with you. The SMIQ, uh, I think when we started working, that was the first time we started experimenting with SMIQ, for example. But then I got the results so good uh, that it became a standard part of my projects, no matter where, for what client I'm working for, whether it's for my own projects as well. I've never stopped using the SMIQ method, and that's just an example of what happens when you test things. That you find something that works for you, and that almost always like you want to use it.
You
It
know, I
becomes your style.
I just got an idea though. Maybe we should do like a long form blog post on the SMIQ for product development. This would be a good way to introduce the concept of SMIQ, but also a way to get audience for this book, right?
Right.
Where we link to the book and why it's important to run the test also when you're writing a book or developing a product. I don't know what you think, but that may
Yeah.
be something we put on our to-do list as we
Yeah.
start
I think
developing the audience.
that's a great idea. So I'm just taking a note here. Q post. Yep. Cool.
Because I've done a book outline with an author where we didn't do the SMIQ, we did our own interpretation of what we saw others doing and so on. And I have to say that I felt a little bit naked without the SMIQ. The
Sometimes I
SMIQ
do.
already provides so much info and insight.
Yes. I mean, I have done that. Sometimes what I do, okay, I don't remember a project I did where there's no SMIQ, but sometimes what I did was, for example, for commercial projects where my bias is like, oh, I want to see how quickly it sells. And I don't have the patience to go through the process that we are teaching SMIQs and stuff um, at the time of developing the test itself. So what I did was I put the SMIQ on the thank you page once somebody purchased. Now there are so many points of failures, and I'm aware of that, and I'm anxious of that. And every time I do it without SMIQ, I have this kind of anxiety that I may totally fail with the idea that just because my research, my desk research says that it sells, it doesn't really mean that I will be able to sell it as well. And this is something that this term, something I got from you as well, that will you be able to, like, it doesn't matter whether it's working or not, will you be able to make it work? And this is where the idea of SMIQ. So what I'm doing is putting it at the end instead of the beginning. I'm still getting some data, but it's way less than if I get in the front. So the project could fail totally before I get responses in SMIQ,
Yeah,
and I'm
absolutely.
aware of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyway, SMIQ is just a great example of one of the language items we have in this book, which is testing. Testing is one of the key aspects of this book writing method. And then tools. Tools are easy to replicate tools, or small process steps that you provide to your audience so that they can overcome their objections on their own. And this is very important, right? We will talk about how we offer services to authors and help them do things like have a coach, a writing coach for them, take care of the actual image development, like logos and cover and all of the design aspects and so on. We can do that, but in this book we tell you how you can do it on your own. And that's an important aspect, that tools are things you can give your audience so that they can do what you already know how to do on their own, independently from you, which is one of the reasons why we're considering doing a workbook based on chapter 7, because that helps authors start their own writing process and know what's in it and, you know, prepare for it and so on. So that's one of the key aspects of tools. All
Cool.
right.
I
So
love tools.
where all of this come from? So this now is the key aspect for us is okay, so we have a list of tools here. We talked about the avatar, SMIQ, empathy map, story map. We have social media tools for testing. By the way, this is probably going to be a bonus because we want the book to be an independent and time neutral object, and then we will probably have either e-courses or extra material that goes into the tools. And of course, email list software, right? This is how we develop the audience. And again, we'll talk about some of specific tools, but not in the book. The book will talk about the concept, and then we have either a tool book or a bonus to download or something that explains some of the contemporaneous tools.
Yeah, and that's mainly because we are thinking of this book as a perennial product,
Evergreen.
evergreen. So it doesn't expire with the disappearance of specific companies that provide those tools or changes in those tools.
Absolutely. All right. So where do these tools come from? That was the question. So here is how you structure the message. Here's the author side. Here's the avatar side. There's always these two sides here. Okay. So first, objections. Why I don't want to take action. This is what we should focus on. Always find this. These are your triggers to structure and define your message. Objections are also very powerful because they are very often linked to emotions, right? As we started this video, Ed was describing an emotion of having to go through chapter 2 and review the edits, right? When people say, oh man, this is a drag, it's boring work, I don't want to do it. That's an objection, right? That's why we talk about, for example, having a author coach that helps you to go through that painful process.
Yeah. I remember one of the authors that we worked with when we were together on the project. Um, the author said, "This means work," and at that time I didn't get it because probably just didn't know that this kind of saying exists. But yeah, I mean, it stayed in my head. This is work. This is work.
Absolutely. And this is work is just another type of objection, right?
Yeah.
Now, what happens is that objections come from pain points, right? What's hard for me to do? In that particular author's example, it was probably allocating time to do something that wasn't consulting, right? So here's the thing though, the objection is what you see. What you don't see is the pain point. So we need to understand, why is the objection there? Here's the cool thing. The moment you know what the pain point is, you can come up with the tool. And the tool is what you give your audience to overcome the objections they have on their own. Don't forget, what you see is the objection and the tool is what you give. So this is the author side, right? So what does this tell us? It tells us that when we find an objection, we need to explore what are the pain points, right? Why is that objection there? The objection is the proverbial tip of the iceberg, right? And there's a bunch of pain points there. We start chapter 3 with a pain point. Chapter 3 has an introduction where is Jennifer, the, of course, avatar and fictitious character, that is our avatar, saying why she doesn't have time to write a book, right? The objection is, I don't have time. But the pain point is something like, I think it takes a long time, so I don't want to put the time because I don't want to commit to that, right? I'm afraid of failing, right? What happens if I fail? And then people will look at me and see me as a failure, and so on and so forth. So those are pain points. And the tools that we present in the book are about tackling those pain points. So here's the thing. Here's how you structure the message. You find objections, you explore the pain points, and then you figure out tools that have worked for you that match those pain points. This is important. They match the pain points. And then you offer that as part of your message. Key thing though, always start from the objection. Recognize the objection is there. Empathize with the person having the objection because they're not wrong. If you do, Jennifer's case, if you write books the old-fashioned, plan up front, write everything alone in a cabin and then publish it into the world method, i.e. the opposite of what we are proposing, it will be frustrating, it will be painful, and most likely it will be a failure. Let's not forget that the average book sells 250 copies for their entire life, right? That's the average book. Our authors sell more than that in a month, and that's every month of every year. So this is a huge difference, right? So we're talking about completely changing the process of writing the book so that you start ensuring success from the beginning. This is, for example, why we emphasize so much the testing and audience development. So what do you think about that, Ed?
I love it. I think I have kind of an aha moment when you were explaining these tools, because this idea was there while we are talking and while we are working on it, but in a structured way, how tools and pain points are, how tools are connected to pain points. This is really kind of an aha moment for me, because I work with coaching industry in different industries, like coaching in different industries, and everyone uses tools. But this kind of clarity for me is really amazing, that like, okay, this is why we use tools. It's not the tools that you use. You can use different tools to get the same result, but it's more important to know the pain points, and this is why. So I think that's really amazing.
And of course, I said that first you start by identifying the objections, right? So how do we do that? All right, so your pain points in the empathy map point to those objections. By the way, pain points or pains are one specific section of the empathy map. The answers from the SMIQ will identify objections. And then simple phrases like, I see what you're saying, but in my case, that surely works for others, but for me, I don't really see how I could do that, right? Or I'm not sure I can. And the most famous one, that doesn't really apply to me because, and of course, the smarter the people are, the more they focus on the because. They don't even recognize that they're saying this, which, by the way, is a self-limiting belief. It's something we impose on ourselves, not because we just said it doesn't apply. The because doesn't matter.
Our identity again.
Yeah. And then, of course, okay, but what if? Right? So these are the objections. So whenever you're talking about your expertise, your topic of expertise to people, and you're suggesting some approaches, tools, or perspectives on how to handle certain problems they have, when you hear this, these are your objections. Write them down. This is fuel for your writing. Okay, so this is chapter 7. More or less, of course, there's a lot more in chapter 7. We talk about the tools and how to use them and so on. But what do you think so far, Ed?
Now, this one, I'm going to steal this idea to even make sales page copies of the structure of sales pages. So like the way we are structuring, actually, we are trying to answer these. And why not just make these headlines like, I see what you're saying, but in my case, like, and then you explain, oh, if you're this works. If you're this works. If you're this works. Stuff like that. There's so much you can do with these questions here. I think they are really useful.
Yeah, but don't forget, in sales pages, that's exactly what you should do. But when writing a book, don't forget that you're not trying to prove them that they're wrong. You're just trying to give them tools so that they can overcome the objection on their own.
Yeah, so authoring is very much like a coaching. Like in coaching, technically, you're not supposed to do the push-ups for them. You have to encourage them, find their blockers, help them find those blockers themselves so that they can go and do the push-ups themselves. So book is very much like a coaching in our view in that case.
Absolutely. That's a great point. You can't do push-ups for your readers. You have to help them do the push-ups.
Yeah.
All right. I think that was a great end for this video. I'm quite happy with how chapter 7 is going. At least so far, it's only a PowerPoint and a video, but it will come out as a chapter.
Yeah. Somehow workbooks and exercises, they excite me. I love them.
Cool. That's it for this week, Ed.
Amazing. Amazing. I love it. So see you guys next time in another video.